There isn't a government in the world that can do that. I want to make it very clear, though, that I don't speak as an advocate for public ownership at one end, private ownership at the other, or any particular hybrid in between. What's important to me is simply that we get the job done for the largest number of people. And the way that happens is going to vary. It's going to be different in different parts of the world, depending on the various needs. Systems by themselves are neither good nor bad. It's much more important that you have things such as good governance, good environmental and economic policy, good planning, and what addresses the needs of that particular community. Let's talk about the challenges here in the United States, lest we think that we don't have any. Water pipes in most of our cities and our large cities are over 100 years old, and they're rapidly deteriorating. Here in New York City, the water system was put in when Abraham Lincoln was president of the United States. Water mains are busting, pumps, collection equipment, and treatment plants are failing. The American Society of Civil Engineers, in its annual report card for American drinking water structures, gave our infrastructures a D-. In 2002, while I was administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, we did an analysis and identified a projected funding gap between current spending and infrastructure needs of between $37 and $117 billion over the next 20 years. At the same time, the National Resources Defense Council did a study, and they cited the Water Infrastructure Network that said that there was $500 billion in upgrades needed and repairs in the United States just to ensure the current safety of our drinking water, and not reflecting the changes that we're constantly making to upgrading the environmental standards on drinking water and what's safe and acceptable. So while no one may know the exact cost of what's needed, we know the cost is staggering. Public-private partnerships offer a potential way to attract the new investment that's needed and the more efficient uses of the resources that we now have. The increasing, and this is something that sometimes we overlook, but they're increasing technological and environmental complexity in water services. And often that is beyond the capability of local governments to handle. They simply don't have the resources for that. Most public water systems in the United States serve fewer than 10,000 people. Many of these small utilities simply lack the management skills or the technological competence needed to keep up with today's regulations, just as they often lack the financial strength to keep up with their aging infrastructure and what they need to do to keep their systems operating. Many of these utilities are looking forward to partnerships and consolidating and exploring partnerships with private companies in order to better serve their communities. Larger U.S. water systems are looking to private partners as well. Between 1997 and the year 2000, some 600 cities had privatized, had worked on private contracts in order to meet the water needs that they saw coming at them. The challenges in the developing world are much more daunting. While some progress has been made toward the Millennium Challenge goals, the development goals that aim to have the number of people who do not have access today to safe drinking water and basic sanitation by 2015, are still out of reach. The world is not on track to meeting those goals today. Substantial additional revenue is going to be needed. In fact, the recent World Health Organization report estimated that $18 billion a year will need to be spent going forward to extend existing infrastructure to achieve those Millennium Development Goals. But we also need effective water policies and improved guidance and strategies for building consensus to overcome political opposition, vested interests, and they do exist, and other obstacles to reform. As the WWO reminds us, the cost of failing to failing to meet the Millennium Goals is enormous. Disease spread by unsafe water causes an estimated 3 million deaths a year. Inadequate access to safe water and sanitation locks in a cycle of disease, poverty, and death for hundreds of millions of people, causing destabilization to governments and opportunities for exploitation. Issues that should be of concern to each and every one of us, no matter where we live. Public-private partnerships have taken many different forms around the world in striking the right balance between the extremes of total public ownership and complete privatization. The first type of public-private partnership is the management contract. This is an approach where all the assets remain in the public domain while the private partner takes on some aspects of operational responsibility for a limited period of time, usually 2 to 5 years. Then there's the lease agreement approach. Under lease agreements, the public utility gives a private entity response for operating, managing, and maintaining the systems. And the duration of a lease for that is a contract sometimes as long as 20 years. On the privatization end of the spectrum, we have concession and divestitures. Concessions transfer operation, management, and most risk and financing responsibility to the private sector. For the private sector to recoup its initial investment under this scenario, your contracts are between 25 and 50 years. A divestiture approach, on the other hand, transfers actual ownership of the assets to the private sector for the duration of the contract. Which is the right model? It depends. It depends on the circumstances. An area that wants to improve efficiency might go for a leasing arrangement, while one that wants to attract investment may favor a concession arrangement. The ultimate course is going to depend on the facts on the ground and the area to which it is being applied. What's more important is that governments establish a clear framework for making the best use of the private sector's participation with the appropriate kind of oversight that will be required. We have to have effective oversight, monitoring, and regulation. There's two experiences that I just wanted to share with you quickly on how this can work or not, as the case is, one in Atlanta and one in Indianapolis. They highlight how public-private partnerships, some of the challenges, and it's interesting because they both involve the same water company, United Water, which is a subsidiary of the French company Suez Environmental. The partnership didn't work out very well in Atlanta, and much of that was felt to be because of a rush to the bidding process, a failure to carefully negotiate and to look at all the issues and draft the contract terms appropriately, insufficient planning, and a lack of political will. In 1998, United Water Atlanta partnered with the City of Atlanta to manage the city's water system for 20 years, according to the contract, for an annual fee of $21.4 million. The city projected a total of $400 million in savings. Within 4 years, they were back. They had canceled the contract. They terminated it. They were enumerated a multiple of complaints on water quality, maintenance, billing, record-keeping, and more. And when they did a review to see what had gone wrong, it turned out they felt it was largely attributed to United Water's cutting back on staff and on training in order to come in with the lowest bid. There are clearly pitfalls about which you have to be very careful. But a more successful example can be found in Indianapolis, Indiana. In 1993, the city of Indianapolis forecasted a 33% sewer rate hike to allow for the necessary improvements to its aging water structure. A year later, they contracted with a White River Environmental Partnership, which included United Water Indianapolis, to operate its wastewater system. The projected rate hike proved unnecessary, and the cost of operations dropped 40%